everyone. My name is Davis McCallum. I'm the Artistic Director at the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first of our Wednesdays with series. Tonight's special guest is Gay Taylor Upchurch, who is the director of this summer's production of Romeo and Juliet. We'll be doing further Wednesdays with sessions next week with Mayanne Teo, who is directing Where We Belong by Madeline Sayed. And then the following week, we'll have special guest Anne Washburn, who is the playwright of Mr. Burns, which I'm going to be directing. We're delighted you're here. It's a beautiful spring day in the Hudson Valley, and it feels like on a day like today, I always think we must be heading into rehearsal soon, and that's true. Our rehearsal for the summer season starts on May the 2nd. And I always look forward to this time of year, but this year is particularly special, as some of you will know, because it'll be our first season in what will soon be the new permanent home of the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival. Just to catch you up, over the last 2 years, we've learned that we'll be receiving a 98-acre parcel of land from Garrison philanthropist Chris Davis. It's located on Route 9 in Garrison, just 3 miles from our longtime site at Boscobel. And it's going to be a new campus dedicated to cultural placemaking, community engagement, and environmental sustainability. We've been working on the plans for this for many, many months, and we're currently going through the review process with the Cultural Planning Board. And subject to their approval, we hope to open a new permanent open-air theater in the summer of 2024. But we'll be performing on this new site in 2022 and 2023. And we'll be performing under the tent that you know and love for many years at Boston. The site, and there's a slide that will help you understand this, is located on a former tennis court, nice and flat, immediately adjacent to the main buildings of the Garrison. For folks who are familiar with Hudson Valley, it's right on Route 9 and Stateville Road. That little pad that you can see right there where the tent icon is, it's perfect size, accommodates our tent snugly. And the lawn immediately adjacent will be a perfect place for picnic. And so we spent the last several months working on how all the logistics are going to work for making theater in a new place, where parking is going to be, where sessions is going to be, where the actors will get dressed, how we'll replicate the kind of ways in which the play marries with the scenery, which has been such a hallmark of our production over the years. We cannot wait locally there this summer. We can do a spectacular speaking of that, I want to speak a little bit about season selection. People sometimes say to me, how do you pick plays for the season at the Shakespeare Festival? What's the kind of output of what balances out on each BSF season? As you know, we perform in rotating rep, which means the same actors perform in different titles. If it's Tuesday and making Burns on Wednesday, you get to see the same great actors transform in different plays. So it's a complicated kind of puzzle to put together a repertory season. But one thing that has been true for many years is that we've chosen a kind of tentpole Shakespeare play. Often a kind of one that we think would be a crowd pleaser, a familiar title, something that people might want to bring their family and a picnic before the show and go to Shakespeare play. And frequently, that's not true. And if you look back over the last, say, 10 seasons, every year this is a different Shakespeare comedy. Let's see, and maybe to try and put in my headphones. Maybe that'll help out. Let's see. All right. We're all learning from the new era of Zoom. Let's see. Sounds better. I think I'm plugged in. Okay, great. Well, so now that I've kind of teed us up for how we got to choosing Romeo and Juliet, it's my real pleasure to introduce the special guest for tonight's Wednesdays with. And it's Wednesdays with Gay Taylor Upchurch this week. And she's the director of this summer's Romeo and Juliet. Hi, GT.
Hi, Davis.
This is so great. I'm really enjoying the new Zoom interface here. I know you just finished a day of rehearsal at Playwrights Horizons, but before we talk about that show, because I'm excited to hear you talk about it, and also I can't wait to see it. I want to just contextualize you and your work for Hudson Valley audiences, but to be your third show under the tent. In 2015, you directed Kurt Rhodes in an Iliad, which really just stands out in my imagination. It's one of the most astonishing artistic feats we've seen under that tent. One person kind of holding all of that volume. I look back on it with admiration, with such excitement. And then the following year, you came back and directed As You Like It, which featured a really exuberant performance from Nance Williamson, and you can see her there in a terrific costume by Charlotte Palmer Lane. And since then, GT knows, but our audience might not. I've been trying to get GT to come back to the tent and kind of complete the trifecta. And this year, I finally succeeded, and she's coming back to do Romeo and Juliet. So I'm so pleased you're here, GT.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really excited to be coming back this summer. It's been magic the first 2 times I've been up there. I love it so much. So I'm really happy to be back. Thanks.
So I think I recognize that smaller rehearsal room at Playwrights Horizons in your background. I know you just finished a day of rehearsal at 5 o'clock. So I have to say, if you need to have a snack or, just go off camera or something, it's really a draining thing to do a full day of rehearsal on a brand new play and then join a Zoom call about another project. So I just want to say thank you for making the time for this. No
problem. Thanks, Davis. Yes, so, the other rehearsal. We're actually down the hall, but I'm in here so I can be by myself and no mask. And
good.
Yeah.
So would you tell us a little bit about Wish You Were Here, the project that you're working on now? I mean, I'm sure our audiences, many of whom are proximate to New York City, would love to come and check it out. I'm curious to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, great. It's a new play by Sanaz Tusi, and we were supposed to do it at Williamstown summer of 2020, which of course got postponed, and then Williamstown moved their season to Audible. So we did get to work on it during the pandemic in January, February of 21. So a year ago now. And we met in a Zoom room and rehearsed and recorded for Audible, all from our private homes across America. And then it's that same cast, but with, Sanaz has worked on the play more, and we're all meeting each other for the first time in person in the rehearsal room, which has been amazing. I've never had that experience before of walking into a room in which there, somebody that you haven't ever actually seen in person before, only over Zoom. So Sanaz wrote this beautiful play about to honor her mother's experience, which the play is set in Karaj, Iran, starting in 1978, the year before the Iranian Revolution. Mm-hmm. And it goes through 1991. And you basically check in once a year on this friend group of 5 women. And you see how the backdrop of what's going on in the world has affected their lives, but also it's about the connection amongst these 5 women. And it's a really beautiful treatise of friendship and home and community. And it's really beautiful, and it's proving a real joy to work on it. Not just to be back at work in a rehearsal room for the first time in 2 years, but also because of the exuberance of these actors and the play. I don't know. There's something about, being away from everybody for 2 years and then coming back to get to work on something that is about being together, and about finding your place in a group. And I have found it really moving to work on, because those are the questions that I feel like I've been pondering, and we've all been isolated for so long. And the questions of the play seem to reflect what's happening now too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, and I was planning on asking you about this a little later, but I have to say, I think that's part of your special sauce as a director, is your ability to bring a group together, and your kind of attentiveness to what makes a group more than the sum of its parts. I guess I'm wondering, given that that's such a strength of yours as a director, and I'll just assign that to you. You don't have to do that. What's it like to be back in the room? I mean, do you find that you're kind of rediscovering who you are as a director and as a collaborator?
Yeah, that's such an amazing question to ask. It's something that I was asking myself just right even before going into rehearsals, of like, okay, I've been away from this for a while. What do I get to do differently? Or, what should I think about in a different way? And I can say that one of the things that I've discovered that I'm just making space and time for is at the top of each day, we just come together as a group in a circle and we breathe together. And if there's anything that we need to sort of talk about, to be present in the room together, that we talk about that. And or if anybody's making new discoveries about the play sort of overnight or that morning or whatever, we talk about it. And it feels like, just being in a circle together and breathing together is something that we just haven't had in so long. But it really does this thing of just helping everyone kind of bring their energy into the room and be together. And not just because it's been so long, but also because of everything that's happening in the world right now. And that nobody has to carry all that by themselves and like come into a room and kind of put it aside and then try to act. That you can come in and you can just breathe together and be human beings for a moment, who are dealing with all of the things that are happening in the world, and the heartbreak and the stresses and all of that, and not have to pretend that it's not happening or put it aside to be able to act, but to be more of your whole self in the room, and actually understanding that just takes the time that it takes, and it feels really strengthening rather than like taking away from rehearsal time. It sort of feels like maybe one of the most important things that we're doing, just to get in the same headspace and together. So that's really lovely. I mean, one other thing is that the week before I started, I thought, I feel really rusty. I don't know, like, do I remember how to direct? Do I remember how to do this? And I thought, well, maybe other people are feeling this way too, of just whatever their various jobs are for this production. And so we, as a group, we talked about that sort of on the first day meet and greet, of like, how, I think making theater, you have to, at a certain point, be willing to make a fool of yourself and make mistakes in front of other people. And that to me is something that I felt rusty about. It's like, I haven't done anything in front of anybody in so long that it feels very vulnerable to like jump up and, make a terrible decision. But if you don't allow yourself that space to make a terrible decision, or to try something that might be foolish, then I think you really rob yourself of a richer experience and a richer production and all of those things. So reminding myself and inviting everybody in the room to like, get back to the fools of making theater, I think is important.
Well, I mean, just hearing you talk about that makes me, long to be an actor or a collaborator in a room of yours. Sounds very, engaging, and like I'd want to come in every day and be a part of that circle. And also maybe offers, because you just mentioned willingness to be a fool, a kind of a good segue into the project that you're working on with us. And Kurt Rhodes and Nance Williamson, who are just brilliant at playing. That's kind of their genius, is their ability to play with freedom and authenticity and joy, and invite other people into that. And they're playing Romeo and Juliet, which is a topic that I can't wait to get to. But maybe before we talk about that, we could talk about the play itself, just the play, because you were talking about the groups a moment ago, and how an individual affects the group. The first line of the play is two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. I mean, a lot of attention gets paid to Romeo and Juliet, but it is also kind of a play about these groups of people in conflict, and how this love story kind of shoots through the middle of this larger community that's it's cleaving. So I wonder, what attracts you to Romeo and Juliet? Like, what's your way in?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I do feel like one of the things that Romeo and Juliet does so beautifully is it does this telescoping out to the community and what's happening in the society, and then goes in very, very intimately, bringing two lovers together on their wedding night. I mean, we have the very private and intimate, and the language that goes along with that, which I think is some of the most rich in Shakespeare. And then this going out to say, this is what's happening, and this is what's affecting these two people, and who could be proxies for other things that are going on, but these are the people that we're with. And I do feel like I've always been interested in that as a director. I mean, it's partly in Wish You Were Here, the play I'm working on now, this idea of what's happening in the community, and the politically in the background, and how an individual's life plays out in front of that, or because of that, or in spite of that, and where you find yourself as an individual, and in this case as a couple, versus what's happening behind you. And I feel like as human beings we often do this, right? Like, when do you turn your attention inward, and when do you turn your attention outward? And there's that just a wonderful push-pull in Romeo and Juliet of getting to do that really beautifully. And then on top of that, another layer of it is just time, and what there's it's one of the things that Shakespeare did from all the source material of Romeo and Juliet, is he sped everything up so that it all happens in 4 days. And I feel like you really step on this roller coaster ride of going out and coming in, and going out and coming in, and how all of those things are affected in just a 4-day time span. And I feel like time is something that we have a very, tenuous grasp of, in a way. I definitely felt that way after these 2 years, where you feel like, was that a day, or was it a year, or was it that there's, a lot of it has to do with just the feeling of something. And the feeling of Romeo and Juliet is that they are just shooting stars. It happens so quickly. And part of that is because of the passion and the love that they have for each other. And also this, the quick flashes of fights that are happening in the community, that it all happens in an instant, in many cases.
So that sounds so right on to me. Yeah, even just looking at the scenic structure, it's like these tiny interior domestic scenes, like you're making a movie. You're inside a small space with 2 or 3 people, mostly in the Capulet household, right? And then out to these public scenes with large groups of people that you only meet once or twice, with all sorts of movement and activity and violence. And anyway, so let's talk about this particular production, because in 2012, 10 years ago, was the last time the Shakespeare Festival produced Romeo and Juliet. And it featured 2 amazing young actors, Carl Howell and Angie Janis, who met on the first day of rehearsal, played Romeo and Juliet, fell in love that summer, and have since gotten married.
I didn't know that. Great.
It's just an amazing story. And it was a wonderful production, directed by Chris Edwards, really fondly remembered by our audiences. And so it was a lot to think about, like, how are we going to approach Romeo and Juliet, one of the most familiar stories, period, let alone in the canon of Shakespeare, now. And so when I approached you about the play, it was with this idea of Kurt and Nance playing Romeo and Juliet, which immediately distinguished this production from, you know, if you lined up 100 Romeo and Juliets, this one would be relatively unique, I think. So, you know, like as a director, what did that lead you to in terms of conceptualizing how do you approach telling the story in that way?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love it because, I mean, Kurt and Nance, it's like, you know, the people who are, you know, anchoring Hudson Valley Shakespeare, and also, you know, they've been in love for decades, and when you're around them, it's like they're on a first date, and you just think, of course, this is Romeo and Juliet. Like, of course. And I think that for me, one of the things that was interesting about it is that then it also allows for the other people in the ensemble to be people from the community who are coming together to tell the story. And because the prologue really sets up Romeo and Juliet as a memory play. I mean, they come out and they say, you know, here we are, and we're going to tell you the story, and here's what happened, and you're going to see them die, and now we're going to go back and tell you how it happened. So, you know, you're already inside of a memory play, which I love because then it opens up, you know, we can see everyone together telling that prologue. Like, this is a group of people who have come together for a reason, on this specific night, to tell this specific audience this story about these two people. And I think there's something really beautiful in that. And in casting it, it really just opened up, you know, it opened up a community of people who are there to support, in a way, like the telling of the story of Romeo and Juliet and Kurt and Nance in that. And I don't know, it just feels very full of love because of who they are. And I also feel like, partly because of who we're starting to gather in this company, that there's a lot of music in it. I kept hearing a lot of hymns. There's something about, you know, Friar Lawrence, and also this idea that runs through the play of, like, you know, if only these two sides had come together sooner, there would have been a different outcome for Romeo and Juliet. And this idea that the parents do end up, you know, in forgiving each other, or in some sort of, you know, making connection at the end. And I feel like everything is sort of in 4 days' time, kind of pulling together at this torn fabric of the society, that there's something that's going to horrible is going to happen, but it is going to unify this group of people. And I think that there's a lot of power in that, and a lot of power in this community coming together to tell us this story about, you know, two factions of people who couldn't see their way to get along until something really terrible happened. And I feel like, I don't know, there's a lot of beauty in that, and sadness in that, and grief in that, and forgiveness in that. And I also think that at this moment in time, looking at two factions that cannot see their way to getting along together is something that everybody's asking this question around the world right now. Of you know, there's so much division, and I don't know. I think that we're automatically, as a community ourselves, going to come to this play with a slightly different lens now, I think.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds so great. So let me ask you about the casting a little bit. You know, because there is something about casting actors who are Kurt and Nance's age to play. I think Julia is maybe described in the text as being 14. It's not completely without precedent, because, you know, Ian McKellen recently played Hamlet, you know, on the West End. I think he's in his early 80s, maybe. I guess there's this theory that we all walk around with some age that we are essentially, and at some point in your life, you reach that age. Some of us might reach it very early. You know, you think about, you know, Kimberly Akimbo, and, you know, a senior actress playing whatever it is, a 9-year-old girl, and, you know, kind of inhabiting that so fully. Or you can imagine, you know, a young actor graduating from drama school and the casting director saying, it's going to be hard for you in your 20s and 30s, but you're going to work all the time in your 40s and 50s. And there's something kind of liberating about the ability to cast actors for their essence, you know, for their spirit, for their energy, rather than for, in a literal way, how the camera sees them, in a realistic kind of television lens. So I'm curious to hear you talk about, about that and how it informs the production.
Yeah. Well, having Kurt and Nance play Romeo and Juliet, there was a moment where I thought, does that mean that we cast, Benvolio, Mercutio the same age as Romeo and Juliet? Are we, saying that that's the age of the characters now? But, every time I went back to the text and tried to figure out put some sort of why onto it, the text just sort of shrugged it off. And I was like, right, Shakespeare doesn't really need us to kind of, once we make a decision like that, I don't know that it needs us to explain anything, because the text is so clear in what it's inviting you to do in terms of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Forest of Arden. Okay, yes, here we are. There's all of these things in Shakespeare that just allow you to get there. And so I think for casting wise, what it seemed to me most important was to cast people who sort of feel, this may sound strange, but who sort of feel ageless in a way, like that there's a spirit that they have where you meet them and you're like, I have no idea, you age what you feel like you're 25, but also you have the wisdom of 45. Like I have no idea where you are in this range. And so that was I haven't cast that way before. And it was a really exciting thing to get to do. And I will say the one person that I thought, I want this person to be really young, is the Prince of Aeschylus. Because I felt like I wanted the Prince to, just in the way that today I feel like the younger generation is sort of schooling us and schooling the older generation of you guys are getting this wrong, and this is what you need to take a look at. And we're going to hold your feet to the fire here. And I think that in that way, the Prince is able to say, you need to change your ways on pain of death is basically, what the Prince says at the beginning. And I wanted that person to feel like maybe one of the youngest people on the stage. And then everybody else, age-wise, it really felt like there was some room to play in there. And like you said, cast for essence and cast for energy and cast for a friend group. And, who do you want to see as Friar Lawrence telling Kurt Rhodes' Romeo to, get up and dust himself off and go back to Juliet? And who do you want to see as the nurse or as Nance's mother? It just, and it, I don't know, it was a real joy to think through those questions and picture different people in these parts.
Okay, my next question for you is about how you prepare. You mentioned you go back to the text and the text would shrug it off. I'm curious if you can give us and our audience just a little window into how you prepare for the first rehearsal. Like as I approach first rehearsal as a director, I just get more and more like a cat on a hot tin roof. It's and then my favorite day of rehearsal is the second day of rehearsal, because I'm like, okay, let's start working on the play. But the pre-production process is so specific. How do you like to collaborate with designers, and how are you thinking about collaborating with, in movement? You and I were passing back and forth a Google Doc about movement, for the fights and the dances.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I like to do is collect images, whether that's a painting or photographs or just a picture of a person, and you think this has the essence of what I'm thinking about for the nurse, or this has the essence for what I think the feeling of the balcony scene might be in terms of lighting, or that there's a way to approach it where you sort of get to steal from other art forms to say like, oh, I like the light in this photograph. And so in terms of working with designers, I do like to have a conversation around images. And I also, and music. And so I have started putting together a playlist, because I do think that this production has something of like old hymns and folk songs and that sort of feel to it. And people singing together. And I want the friar to sing. And so there are, elements of that where I start collecting things and I'm like, oh, this Garcia Grisman tune that I used to listen to 20 years ago, actually I'm suddenly hearing it while I read through this text.
Yeah.
When I go back to the text, I often will, like, things from life or ideas that I have tend to come to the front, and as you're reading it through again, or you suddenly think, oh, actually, if we, the way that these three scenes are back to back to back, and I think if we orchestrate it this way, then movement wise, I can talk to somebody about how to, how do we have the entire cast just suddenly appear as if they've been there the whole time for the street scene, that like you think there's just two people on the street, and then suddenly they're surrounded by 10 other people, and where can they come from? And so that as you're reading through it, the experience that I have of reading it, I try to come up with ideas in that, and also write them down, because I feel like sometimes in rehearsal you can get very focused on the details, which is great, but also I like to keep in the back of my head sort of like one of my first read-throughs of the play, where you were like first surprised by something, because sometimes that's really useful, and you can think, oh, the audience thinks they know the story, but they might be surprised by this scene in Romeo and Juliet. If we do it this way, it might open up something else. So I do think that sort of my first experience as an audience as a reader does play into decisions kind of down the line. And then I also do things like, I'll like write out, like by hand, write out the plot of the story, just so that I, like, if somebody were to say like, what's the plot? Then you have this sort of like, just to get your head in it very quickly, or come up with like kind of the essence of something, right? Like, this thought of, the thought that I had of like Romeo and Juliet, like shooting stars. I mean, that's like a little tiny thing, but it actually, to me, does get at something at the heart of the play. Like this idea that they decide that they're just going to burn bright and fast rather than like, wither away. And that might end up informing lighting, or the stars, and that there's, I don't know, that there's what am I trying to say? That like you can read phrases in the text that then remind you of something visually that you might want to add. So that's another way of working. In terms of collaborating with movement, I think that it's really different for every play. And this play specifically has a lot of fights. And I don't want to approach them in to make them, like, the verisimilitude of it is not as important to me as getting the feel of it. And I think that, and because of that, I want to approach the fighting in a way that feels organic, and that leans more toward movement-based dance rather than, a perfect street brawl. So we'll see what that yields. And I don't know yet.
I mean, I'm excited about that, because I sometimes feel, even in a really well orchestrated Shakespeare play, there's this little, almost like picking up the needle on a vinyl record. When you get to the fight section, you feel the kind of end of the scene and the beginning of like, okay, let's all be safe and careful while we do the fight, because there is something artificial about pretending to fight with real weapons. And we all just kind of agree not to notice that. But by,
it's nice when you can agree. Yeah, to not, like, we're not even going to force you to pretend like you don't know, or I don't want your head to be like, so I know the sword isn't really going through him, so how are they doing? Like, your head just inevitably is somewhere else sometimes in that. So yeah, inviting people to think about, what does it look like when you know that it's a fight, but you can rely more on silhouettes or shapes that people are in, and but they will have swords. I also think sound will be a big piece of it.
Yeah, great. This is just such a thrilling conversation. I'm getting more and more excited about this production every time we connect about it. I have one more question, but I also wanted to just suggest, if folks are watching on YouTube and have a question for GT about this production of Romeo and Juliet, or about her body of work, or about how she approaches the job of the director in the rehearsal room, put it in the chat. And Emily Casey, thank you, Emily, is doing such a great job of orchestrating tonight's event, can pick it up and put it in a chat that GT and I can see, and then we can address it in the time that we have left together. But while any questions come our way, GT, I just want to ask you one more question. Just given that we started by talking about Sanaz's play that you're working on now, and this very familiar Shakespeare play that you're working on next. I mean, is there a difference for you in the way you approach a new play and the way you approach a text that might be referred to as a classic, or at least is familiar to yourself and to audiences before you get to the first rehearsal? What's the distinction, if there is one?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I've heard it said before that directors should approach Shakespeare like it's a new play and approach a new play like it's Shakespeare, which I know what that means. It's like, don't approach a new play as if, everything in it has to be proven and changed, or, that you can approach a new play as if like, this is gold and I'm going to like figure out how to like put up the best production possible, and then approach Shakespeare as if no one's ever done it before. What would you do if this were just handed to you? And I think for Shakespeare, certainly the thing about a director sort of trying to like feeling the pressure of a new take on a classic, right? I don't want to get caught in that trap. Do you know what I mean? I feel like the take is that this is our cast and this is the place where we're doing it at this particular time. And that I don't necessarily need to, I don't need to like set it in Las Vegas to like set it apart. It can be like, I mean, I've seen some wonderful Shakespeare set in Las Vegas, so don't get me. But I'm just saying, I don't feel the pressure to like, have a hot take on it. So, because I think that each production is unique, and I think that trusting that and trusting your collaborators, that everybody's coming with, their best ideas in this, and we do have a vision for it in terms of a community of storytellers and the type of music we're using and how we're using bodies in space and the particular people we've cast. Like we're going into this already with a vision of it in mind. And I think for Shakespeare, I do want to make sure that I'm approaching it just from how I want to put it up in this moment, which in that sense does make it feel like, oh yeah, I'm approaching it like a new play, without the pressure of like, Trevor Nunn's production or whatever it is that's like out there, so that you can come to it fresh. And I also think, if you've seen plays, which I have seen Romeo and Juliet before, and this idea of like trying to read the scene as if you haven't seen it before, I do think is a good practice, because there's definitely, when I allow myself to do that, there's some things where I think, oh, they staged it this way, and I actually think it's this, the whole scene should have a totally different tone. It should be closer to this, for me. And I think that's, allowing yourself to have those different thoughts about it and not feel like you're getting it wrong necessarily. And then you'll see if it works, like I'll be able to try that, and maybe maybe it'll be the worst idea in American theater, and that's fine. Like I can put it up in rehearsal and then change it. But just allowing myself to see it new, see the text anew, is fun. It's one of the things I love about Shakespeare, because it's not new, but you can always find something different there. If you really like just allow yourself to come to it open.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in such agreement with that. I mean, it's so much fun to be in the rehearsal room. I love seeing a Shakespeare play, and I know our audiences do too, but to be with, a dozen or 20 other people in a room, working physically and emotionally and energetically to kind of find out what we collectively think about a text, is a great joy. And I hear you saying that, that as well. And, this does feel oddly like a very timely play right now. So I'm excited to share it with people. I'm going to pause here briefly. And Emily, if you have a question that you want to, oh, here it is. Patricia King, whose birthday is tomorrow, happy birthday, has a question which I'll read out to you. Sometimes R&J is set in different time periods. HBSF, for instance, once set it in the 50s. What are your thoughts about this? You spoke to this in a way a moment ago, but I'm curious to hear you expound on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like sometimes we joke about, like what time is it? It's timeless. Like they're like for Shakespeare, you can sort of just, but I do feel like for this particular, and I have before set Shakespeare in very particular times. I do feel like for this production, I want it to feel like the sense of urgency for it should feel now, but we're not costuming it like of this moment, that the silhouettes will be, not, they'll be modern day, but probably not blue jeans. Do you know what I mean? So that there will be a sense of just like, can you put on, slacks and sort of a loose shirt, and like, you can sort of span a lot of time periods with that and also feel very current. And I think that's the idea. I think in terms of like talking to the actors about it, I do think we're putting it on now. But I do want to use, this is going to sound anachronistic now that I've said that, but I also do want to use swords instead of guns or short or little knives. Like I feel like it was written with swords, and I also feel like getting into modern day weapons right now feels very problematic to me, and feels like it doesn't do much for the storytelling. That actually there was a very specific way that those fights were constructed that have to do with choices that the people are making about who they kill or what's an accident or all of these things. And so I am taking liberties with that. And, I'm trusting that that's I do think that Shakespeare can handle a lot of that sort of blending of time and space in some ways. And so I'm trusting my designers that we'll come up with a plan where all of those things feel good together, where you can wear this particular outfit that's not, it's not going to be from Shakespeare's time. There's no ruffs or anything like that, but that it will feel modern day silhouette, but it won't feel so modern day that a sword suddenly feels like, why is that person holding a sword? And I trust that there's a design where that works. And I also think that there's sometimes in Shakespeare where it's very appropriate to choose a very specific time period. But for this production, I want it to feel like we're all under the tent together, including the storytellers, on whatever night you see it.
That sounds great. Yeah, I've directed a bunch of Shakespeare, but I've never been able to set it in a specific moment. Like I've tried, I really have tried, but then, as you said earlier, the text will kind of shrug it off, and somehow before the first rehearsal, I'll kind of, revert to thinking of it as a play that's set, that whether it's set in the Forest of Arden or in Verona or in Eastcheap, the real setting is on the stage where the audience is gonna meet the actors. Like I imagine it at the Globe and thinking, well, you can say it's the Forest of Arden, but really the fact of the togetherness of the actors and the audience kind of is the guiding principle of the event.
Yeah.
And so it's always has felt to me like a little bit of an extra layer to say, we're all together here, but what we really want you to do is imagine that you're in Britain between the wars or something like that. And you're like, okay, I'll try to imagine that, but really I'm more interested in what's happening right here. And that seems to be a function of the tent, part of the reason why I think Shakespeare seems to work really well under the tent is that it forces us into an awareness of the current moment of togetherness of actors and audience. And the design you're describing feels very, consonant with that aesthetic. I don't know if you agree with that.
I totally agree with that. I also think, there's something about remembering that when like writing it for the Globe and these other places, that there wasn't a set, that it was just the actors in the audience and a couple of columns and like whatever else happens to be there, that it's that the idea, like putting Shakespeare in a proscenium and having to choose walls and articles of things to go in there, it might be a different experience, but getting to do it in an outdoor space where you can just embrace the space and the bodies that are in that space, I think definitely opens it up to, I think, what, the original intent, which was like, whatever we say to you is, I'm going to tell you that Juliet is 14 years old and here's Nance, and you're going to buy that she's a 14-year-old girl. Not that we're asking you to like truly believe that, but that in her essence and that the story that she's telling is about a 14-year-old. And same thing with time and place. Yeah, I really love that about Shakespeare, that it can live in that way. It feels so, I mean, I think it's why, one of the reasons 400 years later, it doesn't feel old, because it just comes alive wherever you, or can just come alive wherever you're doing it. I had this moment where I got to see a show in Epidaurus in Greece in the amphitheater, and outdoor amphitheater where you're just like looking out, over the hillsides. And I had this moment where I thought, oh, this is how you're supposed to do Greek plays, of course. Like this, it makes sense out here because the actors are like this big and there's all these elements, gods, kind of bearing down on them. And like when we try to tidy it up and put it in a little box, you have to do something else. It becomes a different thing. Anyway, just to say, like, the place the play is written for, I think there's something in that, and the tent is such a great approximation.
Yeah, and we'll have such an adventure this summer because it'll be the same tent, but it'll be in a different landscape. So that kind of way in which directors weave the storytelling through, through the land, through the light, through the flora outside, and kind of bring that energy into the tent will be something that all the directors working this year will be discovering, afresh. And our audiences, there were great new opportunities of entrances, that are behind a tree or, rolling down a hill, or things that we've never been able to do at Boscobel.
I need to get up. I want to get up and see the landscape.
Oh yeah, you have to. Yeah. As soon as you open your show. I'm so excited about your show, particularly after seeing English last week, which just totally knocked me out.
Yeah. She's really got something to say. She's really special. Do
you ever feel a little bit lonely when you're rehearsing a Shakespeare play because you don't have a living writer kind of sitting next to you in the rehearsal room?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. It probably means that I lean more heavily also on other collaborators, on the actors who are in it, and also, people around that are able to watch it with me, whether designers or when you come into the room. Yeah, because I definitely find I love collaborating with writers, and so. Yeah, I think it probably means, because I don't know that I've been in the middle of it and thought, well, yeah, sure. I mean, there's times where you think, oh, I wish I could ask Shakespeare what this was supposed, like, what is this line really? But I don't know. I think there's usually when you're putting together a Shakespeare play, there's so many other people around, which makes for a really wonderful, I don't know, community of people that there's a lot of conversations to be had.
Yeah. This book that I love called "This Is Shakespeare" identifies his unique characteristic as his gappiness, which is like what he provides and what he doesn't provide. That means that he's kind of one of the great artistic collaborators with choreographers, with visual artists, with composers. Kind of plays well with others because he doesn't provide too much information, and I'm like, that resonates with me as a person who kind of collaborates with this writer we can't call up on the phone.
Right.
Emily, do you have other questions you want to put to me and GT? We got 10 minutes left in our hour with her. You have both worked together before. Do you have a favorite under the tent memory?
I know what I immediately think of, which was in an Iliad. There's a moment where after it became nighttime, where we turned off all the lights and Kurt lit a campfire, just like an actual campfire, and sat beside it and finished telling us the rest of the story of the Iliad. And it was just like seeing the proverbial campfire actually come to fruition under the tent with Kurt. It was just like such a dream. I don't know. There was something about it. I really just felt like everyone was sort of leaning into him and kind of gathering around. And by that point in the play, he had really, I thought he'd really woven a spell and kind of had everybody in the palm of his hand. So by the time he sat there, just like this fire kind of flickering on his face, just telling us the rest of the story, I just thought, oh, this is the amazing thing that theater can do, and that that storytelling can do, live storytelling can do, of we're all leaning in to hear one person describe events and I don't know, to finish the rest of the story to us. And I loved that moment.
Yeah, that was amazing. But I'm gonna provide an alternate one, which was in the middle of your production of As You Like It, this scene where Kurt, I think, was playing the good Duke Senior, and Orlando comes with his knife drawn to this kind of group of whether they're outcasts or refugees, they're a kind of community of people who have made a new living situation, a new kind of community in the woods. And he comes with his knife drawn, saying, like, give me food. And the Duke says, come sit down and join us. And then there was a piece of music written by Heather Christian. And the whole thing became for me about shared humanity, about Orlando coming with his knife drawn, which was Leroy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that he came with hostility, but he's being met with love, and that he's not a stranger here. And he goes back and brings back Adam, who's on his last legs. And that music was just so powerful. And I think maybe there was some bread that was given to Adam and then passed out into the audience. So it became this moment of literally of communion almost. That was just so cathartic. It was like right in the middle of the play. And I understood, in a way that I haven't before, just what a hinge moment that is in that entire play. It's kind of the center of the play structurally and also emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah. You're so right that is definitely the heart of that play. Yeah. It was such an invitation, and the audience was so right there with us, which was lovely.
Yeah.
Little baskets of bread being passed down the aisle.
Well, the audience was right there with us is probably a good place as any to wrap up our conversation. So I want to pitch again, if I can, the next two Wednesdays with. Next week, we're having a conversation with Mayanne Teo, who's directing Where We Belong. She's an incredible director and is doing a play with Waterwell in the city at here. She's also going to be joining us after rehearsal. And I can't wait to talk with them. And then the following week, Anne Washburn, the author of Mr. Burns, is going to be joining us. Really one of the most extraordinary artists in the American theater for my money. I'm so excited to be producing and getting to direct her play this summer. And then also our tickets for this summer are going to be going on sale, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. For members on April 4th and April 11th, and then for the general public on April 14th. So that's coming right up. So if you're not a HVSF member and you want first dibs on tickets to GT's incredible production of Romeo and Juliet, please join before April 4th. And then everyone, please join us for a season under the tent this summer, our very first in our new home. This theater company really belongs to the audience as well as to the artists. So what I should be saying is we can't wait to welcome you to your new home this summer. So GT, I just want to say again, thank you for spending your time with us. I know how many balls you have in the air right now, and it's so meaningful to me that you chose to spend this hour with us. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me, Davis. It was really nice to talk to you. Thanks.
All right, bye everybody. Have a good rest of your evening. Look forward to seeing you next week.